Taxation is a critical issue, and where we see countries introducing taxes on airline tickets, ostensibly in the name of environmental improvements, it has zero environmental impact. There's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that these taxes don't do anything to improve the environmental performance, but merely make it more expensive for consumers, and in some cases price consumers out of the ability to fly. And the second issue you talk about is changing the tax rules that have worked incredibly well for many, many years and fully compliant with current UN requirements under ICAO, to look at taxing airlines not in their place of domicile where their headquarters resides, but where they're generating revenues. Now this would be incredibly complex. It would not lead to any increase in tax revenues. I think all it would do is increase costs, bureaucracy, and in some cases could have a detrimental impact on the networks that airlines operate. Because if you had to employ people just to deal with taxation for a destination you serve one day a week, or maybe even one flight every day, you may actually take the view that the additional cost burden isn't worth operating there and withdraw from those markets. And there's clear evidence that this is in effect what could happen. So we think the current tax arrangements, tax model work very efficiently, and that people should be very careful about changing that.
Which airlines might be affected more than others in this decision?
Well, I think it'll affect all airlines, because every airline around the world is paying taxes on its profitability. So the question I think governments need to answer is which parts of the world would benefit from this, and which parts of the world would have a negative impact. And unfortunately, when we look at these issues, we believe that it's the developing economies that will be negatively impacted, where the frequency of services aren't as strong as where they are in the developed world, and there's a real risk actually that they could lose connectivity, which would be detrimental to the economic performance of these developing countries. Well, no, I'm pleased to say the industry is improving. We updated our financial outlook for this year. So while the industry is back in profitability, the profit margins are still very thin, a net margin of 3.1%. So there's still a lot of work that we need to do. Probably one of the biggest challenges we face is how we manage the transition to net zero in 2050, which is something that I think is critical for all industries, but particularly challenging for the airline industry. But we have a plan, and we're determined to get there. It is going to be a big challenge.
How is the outlook looking in light of geopolitical and economic difficulties?
Yeah, clearly these are having a negative impact on the industry. But despite that, we are moving in the right direction. And obviously airlines everywhere would prefer to see a much more stable geopolitical environment, an end to the wars that we've witnessed in recent times, and return to a more peaceful operating environment. But we've got to operate in the environment we find ourselves, and I think airlines are incredibly resilient. We have to adapt, change routing, for example, because of closure of airspace in several parts of the world. So it is a challenge, but it's a challenge that I think airlines are dealing with very well.
Speaking of reducing emissions in 2050, there was a lot of talks inside that it's going to be more difficult to reach to that point because of the increasing of fuel prices, because of shutting down some of the factories that actually produce SAF, and they won't be in full capacity until 2026.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a challenge. What we need to do is make sure governments around the world understand the role that they can play in easing this challenge for airlines, because we're aligned. It's not just the airline industry that wants to get to net zero in 2050. Governments want everyone to get to net zero in 2050. So we're asking governments to be aware of the influence that they can bring to bear to make this a more realistic and maybe ease some of the hurdles that we're going to encounter. And obviously that's a role that IATA has to play, is making sure everybody is aware of the opportunities and also the challenges that we face.